Should be good.
Great.
This is Antonio.
Morning.
Morning. All right. Just a second. All right. Well, I'm trying to find the email that where we sent out the agenda here. But I think we can get started. I mean, at the beginning, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our previous meeting on May 11th?
So moved.
Or
Great. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 All those opposed? All right, so that passes unanimously. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda today?
So moved.
Support.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you. All opposed? All abstaining?
Aye.
All right, please, yeah, please, okay. So, sorry, I never actually called the vote there. All those in favor, please say yes. My apologies.
Yes.
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 Thank you. Okay, so that passes unanimously. So now we move on to our only agenda item for the day, which is, unless, Kyle, do we have anybody here for public comment?
There is nobody for comment. Nope.
Okay, I figured, but just wanted to check. So we are going to have a discussion, hopefully have a little work, sort of an informal workshop of the draft of our final report, which is really exciting. I know Dennis is going to have the capacity to share his screen and we'll be able to make some edits in real time. If there's anything that's going to be more involved, of course, we can go back and make those edits and come back to you all with plenty of time to review before our June 8th meeting. But I just wanted to start, I think, Dennis, if you want to maybe share your screen with the draft report. And I guess I wanted to start by going around and just seeing what, people's thoughts are initially. I think it might be a little bit more efficient as opposed to just scrolling through the whole report to just see what people's thoughts were and if there were areas that they felt we needed to make some changes, if there were additions that they wanted to see. So if we want to start, I don't know if there's anybody who wants to go first in terms of mentioning, a couple of things that they think they might want to see changed or added, or just if anybody has any general thoughts or reflections on the draft report, that would be helpful as well.
I'll start out with that. I thought it was
Thanks, Bob.
a very, very good initial report. I was pleased to see the information there on accessibility for seniors and people with disabilities and the homeless. And I didn't have any problems really with any major parts of it. So good job.
Thank you, Bob. Stephanie, it looked like you had something to say.
And I echo Bob's sentiments on this. I just had a few notes that I took when I was reading this that I wanted to bring up. One, when it talks about evictions and the large jump in evictions, part of that large jump was because there was a moratorium, and that should be noted in the report.
Good point.
Because it sounds so much worse than it was, but there were no evictions in between that time.
Right.
Then when we were talking about short-term rental or short-term, we kind of touched, the report kind of touches on it, but I would like to go so far as to recommend that we make homestay short-term rentals uncapped. And I was pleased that the report mentioned the pending potential changes at the legislative level, but I think you could allow homestays. It would open up a few of the short-term rental licenses, but it would not take out any of the housing units for short-term rentals because they're all occupied anyway. And it is, as Dennis told us, such a small portion, but there are people who would like to add that to their housing options and can't, but it does make a house more affordable for a purchaser if they have the ability to rent out a room in their house.
Okay. Stephanie, I know you may have a couple other things, but I think that might be a good point of discussion for the committee. You know, if other folks have any thoughts on that recommendation that we consider, recommending that the city lift a cap on specifically homestay short-term rentals. I don't know if staff has any kind of like technical input that they want to provide on that, or if there are just opinions that committee members might have.
I guess I would throw in, this is Dennis, I guess the only thing I might put on that would be if it was a change in the regulations, and obviously it is, then there has to be maybe a limit based on, I don't know, parking capacity, this, that, whatever. I mean, if I have a 5-bedroom house and I rent out 3 bedrooms and now I've got people parked all over the place, that just kind of aggravates the neighbors and everything else. So, I mean, it's
Well,
kind
I
of a
still
common
think-
sense approach, but
Yeah.
I don't know what we got now.
Dennis, I agree with you. I think that we still have to have them licensed like we are now. And within that license, you only get approved for so many people based on space and parking and all of that. So that
Yeah,
that
I like
checks
it.
and
That's good.
balance is already in place.
Okay, good. I'm good with that then. So when you say uncap it, what do you mean, Steph?
So right now, our short-term rentals are capped at 250 units in the city of Marquette.
Oh,
I
okay.
I think the number was 11% of those were homestay.
Okay.
And homestay is where you share an entrance, you share a house.
Yep.
So Dennis, can you maybe, I mean, one thing I'm curious about is, the statistics on homestays. I mean, and also what technically qualifies as a homestay according to the city. I mean, are those considered short-term rentals by the city? I mean, if so, how do they differ from other short-term rentals? Could you provide some background, from your staff perspective to the committee on that?
Yeah,
Just so we're all on the same page.
I'd be glad to do that. So a homestay is kind of lumped into the short-term rental, and actually from a staff perspective, that's the more preferable one because you have somebody on site at all times managing the property. As far as caps or something like that, I'm trying to wordsmith this right now, that I think you'd probably want to word something like evaluate the permissions for homestay short-term rentals as they're like less intrusive on a neighborhood due to owner occupancy or something like that, and then kind of throw it in the hands of the planning commission to look at. But from our perspective, those are the ones that honestly, historically, we have the least problems with. And the homestays actually have a kind of like a historical value to them, because before the big boom of, college housing and rental properties, what you used to have is people would rent out a room to a college student. And that's essentially what a homestay is you just rent out a room in your house to someone. I understand the concerns from the committee related to parking and things along those lines. And that really becomes a planning commission exercise. That's why I think the key evaluate is really important in that.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I think that, my biggest concern with short-term rentals is that, of course, they're going to eventually, potentially there could be parking problems, right? Potentially there could be neighborhood problems. We don't know. But the one thing that does seem pretty certain from the experience other communities have had is that short-term rentals often take up the long-term rental stock. You often have people purchasing like entire homes just to convert them into short-term rentals. But with this specific situation with homestays, maybe that doesn't seem that it would be as much of an issue. I don't really foresee how homestays specifically could contribute to a shortage of, more affordable, rental units, or how they could drive up housing prices. And
I
as
think-
Dennis notes, it seems to be the least likely to cause any problems because you have the homeowner living right there in the same structure or on the same property.
Just have a
Evan,
question. Sorry, Stephanie, you can go ahead.
Stephanie, go ahead, and then Jackie.
Just to respond to what you're saying, I think it essentially does exactly the opposite of what the concerns are, because it does allow someone to rent out a room in their house for shorter term or longer term, which opens up rental stock, and it allows people to purchase knowing that they're going to be using part of their house for homestay, so it makes their homes more affordable.
Okay, to be clear though, Dennis, maybe you can answer this, and then Jackie, we'll get to you in just a second. But I just want to clarify. So a homestay, can that only be a short-term rental, or can it be a long-term rental as well? That would be a question for you guys.
If you give me a second, I'll go back and take a look at it. I'll do that
Sure.
right now.
Thank you, Jackie. What you had a question?
It's probably a question for Dennis too. So we have a couple recommendations that would make it easier to add an accessory dwelling unit to your home. So if you were to put an apartment above your garage, because it's a separate entrance, that wouldn't qualify as a homestay, correct?
Correct.
You guys, yep. That would make it an accessory dwelling unit.
That's the difference, is the separate entrance. So then, if we did include the recommendations that make it easier to build the ADU, those would, and just by default, we would assume they'd end up being long-term rentals, since the short-term cap is already hit right now. So that would be the intention for this committee, would be to allow people to add long-term rentals to their home instead of short-term.
I think that
In
you could
my
do.
mind- Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
In my mind, I think that the legislation is going to answer that question for us.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's the question then, is that if we make it simpler and easier to add these types of units to people's houses, and the legislation goes through that restricts us from putting any sort of a cap or restricts the city, then what we would be doing is possibly opening the door to a ton of short-term rentals.
I don't think you're going to see that legislation pass, to be honest with you. I have some insider knowledge on that one. It was basically introduced to get the hotels to the table. And I think you're going to see a compromise in it where local units are going to be allowed to continue to do what they've been doing. And basically it was political to get the hotels to the table, because from the perspective of the state legislator, they're not contributing enough to a pool of funding. But you do raise an excellent point of being prepared for that, because everything could go out the window. I do have an answer on homestay. A homestay can be a short-term rental or also a long-term. By definition, it can be as short as one night.
And I think as long as the city keeps in place the licensing and the parking requirements, that, answers some of the questions that may end up happening.
Okay, just
Yeah, and
for,
right now, just to clarify, Dennis, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't allow excess. Our current city zoning ordinance, our land development code does not allow ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. Is that correct?
I believe that to be correct. I will verify right now.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Dennis, go ahead.
no, can we, just for my own little old brain, can we clarify what the exact definition of short-term rental is versus, is it like less than 6 months? Is it like less than 90 days?
30 days, I believe.
30
It has
days,
to be
okay.
30 days or less. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess to respond to Steph's suggestion, I could support that because I think that would be an enabler really to help people that maybe can't afford the home because of their 30% or whatever, that if they rented out a room for whatever it is, $100 a month or something like that, it might really be able to put them over the top comfortably financially where they're not going to be house poor. So, obviously the regulations would be the devil in the details, but, if I had a house and it was on any side of town I wanted, but I couldn't quite pull it off, I was going to be house poor. If I could rent a bedroom for X number of bucks and that makes me comfortable, then I think I would support that. The goal, I guess, is that we're going to be adding theoretically somebody to the city that's going to be potentially working in the city. Because that's kind of one of our overall concepts, I think, that the city wanted when they put the task force together.
I will say traveling nurses right now are having a horrible time.
Yep.
And locum physicians are having a horrible time finding something.
Agreed, because they end up paying through the nose at hotels or something else. Unless you've got I know somebody's got a couple of VBROs, and what he's done is he's converted those into 6-month rents, give them a discount, and then they just are here for 6 months, and he rents it out for 6 months.
Mark,
My
were you
only-
saying something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, with all of the short-term stays, how is that affecting people's primary residence and their tax issues for their homestead exemption?
Well, I can tell you, I can tell you from my own house, because I have a shared unit, shared entrance, shared access, they have the ability to lock a bedroom door. I do not lose my homestead exemption.
But the
Steph, would you
ones
lose it if
where-
you had an AUD?
It's just 2 bedrooms in my basement. It's
So,
my,
but
it's a
basically-
homestay.
If you have and I think the city should follow up because I think they're losing a lot of revenue. The homestead exemption, or the schools are losing out, really, where people are using their homestead exemption, but then they're renting out a portion of their property. You had to do it based on square footage. And if you rented out a third of your home, you lost a third of your homestead exemption. It's
I will
technically
tell
the way
you,
the
they
law
do,
works.
they do stay on top of it. Very early on, I had feedback that said, lock your valuables in your car because there is no lock in this unit. And I said, oh, I'll put one on. And then I got a letter from the city saying if the door to the basement bedroom area, if that is locked, you will lose your homestead. So I do think they police it.
Okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this whole short-term rental topic?
I was on a call yesterday, and I'm sorry I got jumped on late here. But there are some bills in the House and Senate in the state of Michigan addressing this. Have you discussed that and addressed that?
We did briefly discuss that. It seems unlikely that legislation will pass, at least in its current form, for several reasons. Personally, I find it pretty concerning, but I don't think it's going to pass.
Okay, thank you.
But good point for sure. That's definitely something that we are definitely keeping an eye on at the city. I know there have been some discussions about that.
Can the committee take a look at my screen and look at the highlighted?
Can you
text
zoom in a little
regarding-
bit, Dennis? It's a little hard to see on my screen.
Let me try.
Fine on mine.
Oh gosh, all right.
Sorry, maybe the resolution on my screen is just that bad.
Why is it not zooming for me?
All right, it's working for me. Is everybody else good?
Yeah.
Great.
We good with that?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, that looks pretty good to me.
I think you need an of between form and rental.
Oh yeah, it's
Just
form
a
of
small
rental.
thing, but
Yep, good catch, Jackie. Yeah, I'd be comfortable with that. I mean, I've expressed this before. I mean, my personal opinion is that, and I think probably most of the city commission, just based on conversations that I've had, is that we feel that our current short-term rental cap is working, and that it is an important policy for the city. But I feel that this could definitely be a pretty common sense modification to that policy, depending on what the planning commission ends up deciding.
I think this is going to flesh itself out too during the tourism planning effort that's going to look at the short-term rentals occupancy as well.
And I appreciate
Great.
the comment from Stephanie and Dennis. I think too. I think it's important to acknowledge that with the Michigan exemption, homestead being the requirement being 6 months or more, it's actually going to help nurses, some PAs, et cetera, that may be looking for needs that are under 30 days.
Yeah, which is definitely a need in our community. I mean, I'm even thinking about our new city manager who's moving up here from downstate. Like, I've been wondering, like, gee, I wonder where she's staying until she starts on June 7th. So anyway, I think that this is a good topic. I think we've kind of exhausted it. Does anybody else, moving on, have any general thoughts or reactions to the draft report, or, specific changes or recommendations that you would like to see in here?
I have a couple things.
Before you chime in real quick, can I just do this because it's bugging me and I'm here? We're removing the winter parking ban recommendation. Is everybody okay with that? We had
Yeah.
a line through.
Yes.
All right, I'm
Yep.
good.
Yeah, I felt that was, Dennis and me were talking about this. We just felt that the overwhelming feedback from that work session that we had was that would be a prudent thing to take out for the time being. So,
Good call,
Jackie?
Dennis.
Yeah.
It's just too much noise.
Yep. All right, Jackie, sorry, go ahead. You have the floor.
Just a couple things. One's kind of small, but at the beginning where we talk about the list of people, and it has the people that we spoke with or that Evan spoke with as contributors. It just kind of sounds like they helped write the report, which I wouldn't want to give that impression. I don't know if we can change it to presenters or some other word that doesn't make it seem as though they were a part of the report themselves.
Maybe stakeholders?
Yeah, I don't, whatever we
I don't
want to
know.
do it.
How about
That's a good point.
interviewers? Those are the people we interviewed and gave presentations.
Sure, interviewees.
Yeah, something like
I don't-
that.
Yeah, like I don't know if you consider them expert, but it's a term you could use is subject matter experts if you feel that they qualify as such.
Or just witness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting. Okay, so we got interviewees. Okay, which would be accurate. I mean, even the people that came to our meetings, we did Q&A with them, right? Or subject matter experts. I kind of like that from Antonio. Do people have a preference on those two?
How about subject matter presenters? Because they don't always have to be experts. Some of those people might be in their industry questionable whether they thought they were in experts. And I don't know. I don't really know anything about that stuff. So
sure. Well, and some of these people we didn't actually necessarily talk to, but they sent us letters or like memos, or like QPAD. We looked at their housing market assessment. So maybe that would be subject matter presenters. Jackie, did you have a thought?
I mean, I think that's fine. Subject matter presenters, subject matter, like, background information, things like that.
Okay.
And then the other thing that stuck out to me in the recommendations was we talk about encouraging things and then we talk about incentivizing things. And so incentivizing, or I think there was something in there specifically about gap financing. My concern is that we're recommending that the city commission start using its tax dollars to help facilitate building workforce housing. And I don't know that I would be comfortable with a recommendation where the city is using its money to do this. I think if it wants to encourage or prioritize builders and developers that want to build this type of housing, that's good. But I would be worried about using things like incentive or other words like that, that might make
But
it seem as though the city's going to fund these things.
Yep.
Jackie, I completely agree with you. If you go down into, starting at, page 18, where you start the recommendations, you go into, the first thing is such a role could include providing special financing, land, or other incentives such as density bonuses.
Yeah.
That's implying money. You
Right.
go further down into these, page 20, almost the entire line item of that page 20 talks about some form of subsidies.
Right. So that
You
just,
know,
it worries
and
me. And there was also a section
line-
about, I'm trying to find it, where we talk about public-private partnerships. And I think this is similar to what NMU did, where they own the land, but the private group owns the buildings, the new dorms that were built. And then in so many years, those buildings will revert to NMU. And then NMU becomes the landlords basically of those dorms. And I think that works for university because they generally provide housing for their students. But that also, I'm not sure I would be comfortable with a recommendation where the city becomes a landlord either.
Can I clarify that?
Sure.
So I think totally valid concerns, and I think maybe we need to wordsmith this a little bit better. But I mean, certainly the intent here is not to recommend that the city become a landlord in that way, like for example with NMU. Certainly not the intent. Also, the intent is definitely not that the city be using general, taxpayer dollars to subsidize, housing development or affordable housing. If you read, in one other part of the report, there's a discussion, and Anne Giroux mentioned this in her presentation. Dennis has mentioned this to us before. The idea of using like brownfield plans to use brownfield TIF to help provide that gap financing for, say, a more affordable kind of like workforce housing development through a brownfield plan. In the same way that we've done similar things to essentially, use brownfield TIF to indirectly subsidize development down at Founders Landing or at the new hospital. So, I mean, that's more what we were looking at. And then with regards to like incentives, that doesn't necessarily need to be financial incentives, right? So, for
What other
example,
sorry, go ahead.
well, for example, it mentions the idea of density bonuses, which is another thing that we mentioned later on in those recommendations on that same page, which is basically where you say, okay, maybe our height limits in certain districts, like say the downtown, could be such that, maybe to go that extra story, that top story, you need to have a certain number of units that are affordable or something, by some definition established by the city. So like that's more, which is a zoning policy.
So you're
issue,
forcing
not-
a subsidy on the developer.
Well, no, it would be an optional thing, right? Like if the developer wants to go that extra story, they can opt in to do that. But if they don't want to, then they don't have to. So and that's
Or
not,
they
yes,
have
like
to
again, that,
subsidized if they want to go higher.
sure. I
Just
mean,
making a point.
no,
It's
I
not
understand.
Good competitive. Doesn't make good business sense.
Okay, I respect that opinion, Mark, but I think that that's a separate discussion from the one about should the city be using taxpayer dollars to subsidize housing development? Should the city, be becoming a landlord and directly managing, affordable housing? And I think that the answer to those questions, in my view, and please feel free to disagree if anybody disagrees, but I mean, my intent was definitely not to be recommending either of those things. So maybe we can clean up that language and specifically state that we're not suggesting the city take on ownership or direct management of affordable housing. We're not suggesting the city use general fund taxpayer dollars to subsidize affordable housing when we're talking about these things.
I mean, can we go so far as to say is that the city is not a developer? I mean, they do partner, but I don't think we want to leave the impression that the city will be developing these.
Well, I mean, can we, I guess to start with something concrete, can we just take out that second sentence in part 1 of define the city role? If we take out such a role could include providing special financing, land, or other incentives such as density bonuses, I think you eliminate, I mean, I guess there's no reason to call that out specifically.
How about if we change it to mechanisms?
How would you
I think
phrase it,
that-
Dennis?
I've changed the incentives to mechanisms. Such a role could include providing special financing, land, or other mechanisms such as density bonuses.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dennis, I think that could be good, but I think that the concern is also the special financing piece.
And
I
then,
mean-
Evan, you're talking about brownfield with that. So can we just say that, provide special financing through brownfield plans or?
About
Could it,
here, let me try this.
That is a good
Yeah.
word to use.
yeah, brownfield tax increment financing. We could be more specific.
Okay, but
Well, yeah, but you have to remember that
is
brownfield
brownfield-
has to qualify to be able to be used. So it has to be condemned housing or polluted land and all those
Yeah,
things. So,
I think you're covered with facilitating instead of
Okay.
providing.
okay.
Yes,
Mhm.
agreed.
Yeah, I would hate to say, oh, well, we didn't say, we only said brownfield and TIF, and there's this other mechanism. I'd rather have that more vague as a recommendation.
I think
Yeah,
just changing it from providing to facilitating is good. I think that doesn't make it seem as though the city's gonna act as a bank.
Okay.
And
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up,
Here's, I got it. Bear with me. I think a lot out loud.
Sure.
How's that?
I almost like the
Like that?
specifically mentioning brownfield tax increment financing better. I don't know if other people
You
feel
just
that
put
way.
a parentheses
But if
and then
there's-
put example, brownfield. and
Sure,
TIF.
that's a good suggestion,
Yeah.
Mark. That's a good suggestion. So maybe, yeah, example of brownfield TIF.
And spell brownfield. My God.
Dennis, I would put example so that.
Yeah, like EX
Limit.
dot comma. Yeah, sure.
So I'm looking through now, was there a section, or did I just make that up in my head, where we talked about public-private partnerships with the city to create housing?
No, it's,
Let me,
it's back in the recommendations, I think,
Oh, it's F.
number F.
It's 3F.
Partnerships, yep.
Yeah. That's the other one that stuck out to me as potentially.
so
problematic.
that may be a way that we could revise this. So just so everybody's on the same page, we're under 3, seek partnerships, and then down in item F, this is on page 21 near the top. So I think maybe, Jackie, a way that to change this so that our intent is a little bit more clear here is to seek public-private partnerships with private, just reverse it. So it says with private, for-profit, and or not-for-profit housing developers who are interested in developing affordable and missing middle housing. Would that address your concerns?
Well, I think my concern is the partnership aspect of it. What would the city's responsibilities be in that partnership?
Could be
Hey,
providing brownfield TIF, could be providing city land, potentially.
Evan, sometimes what might happen is maybe somebody has some parcel of land further down the street. There's no water and sewer main. So maybe that developer that wants to develop 10 acres further down, and there's another 10 acres in between, maybe they split the cost between the city and the developer putting in that water and sewer line, because the city then knows when the property in between gets developed, they're going to recoup it. So basically, they're taking longer to get their money back, but it's a good investment for them to get the rest of the property developed.
Check out
That's where I
the
see that.
the word the wordsmithing I did on that and see if that covers what you're saying. Again, it's seek public-private partnerships to facilitate, being the key word, the development of affordable and missing middle housing with private for-profit or not-for-profit housing. I think that covers what Mark's talking about and what Jackie was concerned with. That's kind of ambiguous, but it leaves all of those situations in because we're seeking partnerships to facilitate development, not to develop. So that doesn't make it sound like the city's going to be in the development business, but it also leaves the door open for a lot of different interesting types of partnerships.
Jackie, do you feel that addresses your concerns, or do you still have concerns about it?
I think it's better this way.
Okay. Yeah, because I think you raise a really good point of like, our intent definitely is not to say the city is going to be the direct, developer or the landlord or anything. And it's good because I mean, if you interpret it that way, I'm sure other people would have interpreted it that way as well.
So then I just had one final question, not to totally take over this meeting. But up on 2 ABC, where we're talking about lot size requirements and height restrictions and all that, what is the current restriction for, because I thought we had covered that ADUs when zoning was redone, that it's much easier to have your home be a duplex and also have an ADU built on it. So what restrictions are in place now that would prevent you from putting an apartment above a garage or adding an apartment in your basement or something like that?
I have one or two, but Dennis, please respond initially.
Yeah, well, the challenge that we have now is that these are special land uses, which require like site plan review and a planning commission public hearing and things along those lines. So as I interpret this recommendation, it's to make these as a permitted use. With regards to lot size requirements for duplexes, I believe that's already been addressed in a recent amendment to the land development code, but I'm comfortable leaving it in there. I mean, there are other things that can be looked at. And the permissible height of accessory dwelling units to allow them to be constructed on top of garages, that one needs to stay in there to look at that.
What's the current restriction?
I think it's currently 20 feet.
Yeah.
The only thing that when I read that would be concerning, if I lived in an already kind of dense neighborhood, my concern would be that sounds like you could put, 4 stories on top of your garage if you wanted to, right? So I wanted, when I read it, I want to try to think like, all right, how could this be interpreted? And that's one way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's fair. I think that the intent with this was more to, so I've had a couple of constituents reach out to me as a city commissioner saying, hey, I'd love to build like a little apartment on top of my garage or something. I was reading about how ADUs are allowed, but then I, went and looked into it more and realized that with the height restrictions, I'm a few feet, over the limit of 20 feet if I put it on top of my garage. So that's, I think, more the intent behind this.
Right. And I agree with you. I think what Dennis just did fixes it.
Okay, great.
Single level. And then he graciously highlighted the zoning and incentives. So I think that fixes that problem as well, because then you wouldn't necessarily interpret incentives as financial.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, again, thanks, Jackie. That's a really good point. Did you have anything else, or?
As far as changes, I think those were the things that stuck out to me. I thought the report was thorough.
Great. Does anybody else have any other, again, general reflections or thoughts, as well as specific changes or edits they'd like to see made here?
We do have that opportunity zone there, and I did want to point out that Lake Superior Village is in an opportunity zone, so that is being utilized.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah.
That was blank. I don't know if we were supposed to add to that during this discussion, because those 2 sections were empty.
We were gonna get to that, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now.
No. I just want to go round robin here and provide an opportunity to anyone to call out specific changes. I felt that might be more efficient, and then we can get to those couple items there to have some discussion.
What's the point of item 2K on, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it, I just want to understand a little bit more about it, of doing a survey on quality housing. What is that going to do? Or what is the intent?
I can speak to that. Actually, that is a kind of speaks to the effectiveness of rental code enforcement in terms of our zoning code enforcement, more so than the fire department end of things. But really what it looks at is it's a housing quality survey. Are we making an impact with our zoning and code enforcement, kind of avoiding the whole broken window syndrome, right? Is it working for us going out looking for those property maintenance code violations? And we've done those, periodically every 10 years with the master plan updates. So we'll be looking at doing that again.
Dennis, do you want to maybe specify or add in there that this is to analyze the effectiveness of not just the city rental code enforcement system, but also our enforcement of our land development code? But yeah, I think the intent there, Mark, is just that, there are some rentals in Marquette or in some neighborhoods in Marquette that aren't in great shape. In the past, as part of our master planning processes in 2003 and then again in 2013, the cities conducted these studies and actually found, for example, that from 2003 to 2013, the average quality of rental housing in 5 specific neighborhoods that were majority rentals in the city of Marquette did improve significantly from 2003 to 2013. And I think it would be interesting to see how that's maybe changed, what the trends are in the last 8 or 10 years here, and that analysis could be used accordingly.
Dennis, mildly off topic, but back in the 70s and 80s, when they made everybody add egress porches and stairs down off of the big Victorians, a lot of those are not being maintained, and they're either dangerous or should be removed or at least updated, just when you get into this whole aspect of reviewing the rental code enforcement.
Duly noted.
I don't know if you've driven around and seen some of those that are just literally falling off buildings.
Oh, I've seen some.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's exactly the kind of thing that I think could be addressed through this. I mean, also, I think that it's important that if we're asking people to accept, say, hey, in your neighborhood, there might be a couple ADUs, maybe one house or 2 houses, right? And your neighborhood becomes a duplex where maybe it's currently a single family home. That's important to provide adequate housing for people that's in a more, kind of middle income price range. But at the same time, we need people to kind of throw people a bone and say, hey, look, we're going to be making sure that our code enforcement is we're going to be staying on top of that, and that your neighborhood isn't going to decline in quality, or your property values aren't going to go down because of this. So. Does anybody else have any other, suggested edits or anything?
Under item
General.
2, M, O, and P, and I know they're with the Housing Commission, but we're kind of asking them to do more subsidies. I guess, where is that money going to come from, or do we have any suggestions? While I know it's needed, but again, that's a big ask without figuring out any money.
I mean, I think
Sharon,
when I read that recommendation, it just sounds, it's not a directive. It's, it's a suggestion that if the Housing Commission could, it would add more housing, which I think the Housing Commission would if it had the money to do that. So it doesn't strike me as a mandate that we're going to end up going into extreme debt to build more housing.
And
And,
if
you know-
we were to do additional housing, we would be able to get some of the funding, hopefully through HUD, through the Section 8 or PBRV funding.
Right. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon and Jackie, but the Housing Commission, and basically you get all of your funding, and any subsidies that are provided come from the federal and state government, correct?
Correct. There's, the opportunity also to do additional tax credit units, where those would have to come in with some kind of a voucher also. So it would be a combination of a tax credit and a federal subsidy.
And I know that earlier, that item P was directly in response to, the discussion we had back in April, where Sharon, I believe you noted specifically that, it might be helpful to potentially not only get more housing choice vouchers for the community, but also to be able to potentially allocate some of those specifically for permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. And I know Nick Emmendorfer and Ryan Redmond seem to be, definitely in agreement with that. So that was sort of where that specific recommendation originated from.
How's that word facilitate look instead of?
It's my new favorite word.
This is good. I mean, I think it more accurately reflects what our intent is.
Agreed.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
It's a really big word for planners. We like it. Facilitate, because it's ambiguous enough that we can go either way with it.
I'm pretty sure that word appears many times in the county master plan that I've been helping work on. So, yes. So unless I'll put out a final call for comments here.
I have two more.
Go ahead,
I have
Stephanie.
One quick one also.
When we talk about homelessness, I guess I'd feel more comfortable having some sort of statement that homelessness itself is fairly outside the purview of our limited scope, except in encouraging the allowing of more permanent supportive housing. I just feel uncomfortable. I mean, they're attacking that whole issue as well. But one thing we can do is to recommend more permanent supportive housing, as that really doesn't fall anywhere. And I can't remember if Dennis said that was already in the works or not. And then there's one line in the talking about senior housing, and I get a little frustrated, and I know we had public comment to this of downtown, and that's great, except if that becomes congested, they won't want to be there either. But when we're talking about senior housing, any of the housing that we encouraging being developed can be utilized by seniors. So I almost think we're more diverse if we encourage more development flatly. I mean, I don't want to stand in the way of another Snowberry if it's needed, but I would hate to see something get developed because there was more incentive to go senior than there was to go just housing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand where you're coming from, Stephanie. Personally, I mean, as I'm looking back through the senior housing needs section, the section where we're discussing homelessness and permanent supportive housing, I mean, rereading it, I personally think that it's pretty clear that we're leaning into the permanent supportive housing issue, and in terms of what the city can actually do with the senior housing, there is a paragraph, it's the second to last paragraph in that section where it says taking action to allow the development of more missing middle housing in general will be critical for seniors, and explains how that can help benefit them as well as other folks, as long as it's accessible.
Yeah, that paragraph ends with, has the added benefit of flexibility. If housing is affordable, walkable, and accessible for seniors, it will also be affordable, walkable, and accessible for other city residents, which I think is exactly your point, Stephanie.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was another sentence in there that kind of took that away. And it
Okay.
just wanted to have that discussion. And the one other thing, when President Erickson did his public fireside chat, I did ask him if they anticipated doing more housing on campus. And he said that was the goal for 2023.
Great.
That's good
They
to hear.
understand they have a workforce housing issue as well. And they have the land to support it.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as student housing goes, I mean, the vast majority of the content in there really came from that one-on-one interview that Dennis Smith and I did with Jeff Corpy, who, worked for NMU Housing for many years and was the director of that department for 5 years. And now he's a consultant, essentially helping develop student housing in other parts of the country. So, definitely he had some good perspectives, I think, as somebody that was involved in NMU Housing for many years.
Evan, the permanent housing, I thought it was clarified, but not really certain it is at this point, that the city really has nothing to do with permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is a funding type more than anything else, and the city does not regulate that. So,
I thought it
encouraging
had to fit with zoning.
no,
Yeah,
I thought we
there
had a
was
zoning
something,
issue with it.
I think
No.
the
Yeah.
zoning issue wasn't it restricted by the zoning? I think that's what we talked about.
that's what was implied by one of our presenters, but zoning has nothing to do with permanent supportive housing.
Oh.
Dennis, you clarified that, did you not?
Yeah, the zoning is moving forward with being amended to allow that. We recently had a case where it was seen as kind of like one of those things that doesn't fit into zoning. So let's have a hearing with the planning commission, and they did approve it. So moving forward, they will be amending the ordinance to allow that permanent supportive housing.
Okay, but keep in mind, all permanent supportive housing is subsidized housing with a social worker. So
Right.
it is not a zoning issue.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear where you're coming from there, Sharon. But I think that just based on the fact that we have actually, I mean, at a recent planning commission meeting that they had a, whole discussion about this. I mean, it seems that to at least some degree, it seems to be a zoning issue. I don't know, Dennis, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it does seem to be an issue the planning commission has discussed as.
Yeah, it was a zoning issue in terms of not the financing or the setup or any structure related to it. It was basically an issue of number of persons in a residence.
Okay, that again is not permanent supportive housing though. So that's my big concern, is that permanent supportive housing is an apartment with a social worker. It's not a number issue. That is more like a foster care or some other kind of like an adult foster care situation. So my concern is that permanent supportive housing is not being looked at correctly. It's not group home. Permanent supportive housing and group homes are two totally different things.
Okay, I mean, Sharon, can I ask, what would your, I mean, if we were gonna.
I think I have clarification. So like something like a normal permanent supportive housing situation, that can be done. And it doesn't require a special zoning permit. If you own a house and you have an aunt whose husband dies and you need to take her in and she has to have special care or something like that, you can have up to 4 unrelated people in a home. So it's not an issue at all. The planning commission looked at it from the presentation we had, where it becomes basically essentially a Jansen house in a neighborhood was what they were presenting. And that's the one that the planning commission was dealing with.
So the presenter was wrong, bottom line, with what he was presenting, saying that the city was stopping permanent supportive housing. So all permanent, I have permanent supportive, or I don't. Oriana Ridge has permanent supportive housing. Grandview has permanent supportive housing. And those were never hit by this, gone through the city. So.
I mean, so what Spear Housing Solutions is doing, I mean, wouldn't that be a form of permanent supportive housing though?
No.
I mean, like.
No.
Okay,
No,
so
Ryan,
how would
according to
you
HUD
define it?
definition, he doesn't qualify for permanent supportive housing. He has he's outside of the box, not really nameable. He's providing services that others don't provide. So he's creating his own entity type of thing. So my concern is, as a funder, if I'm looking at doing tax credits with permanent supportive housing, I am then going to need to go to the city to discuss that. And I don't want that to be in that level. So what Ryan's doing is outside the box.
And
Is it illegal? I mean, is it outside the box or is it below board? I mean, that's very important discussion.
Funders are taking a look at whether or not he is dotting all his T's and crossing all his I's. Or the other way around, crossing his T's and dotting his I's for funding purposes. So I don't think he's doing anything illegal. That would be up to the city, whether or not you want to have 5 people in a house that are non-related. And, that is more the zoning issue. That is just his rental structure more than his subsidized structure as far as the city is concerned.
So what I think is that this is definitely a complex and pretty weedy topic that I think we just need to look into a little bit more. And this is the kind of thing where we're not going to be able to make these amendments or changes to the plan right here and now, or to the report right here and now. I think that what we can do is go back to the drawing board and make sure that we're phrasing everything accurately. We can double check, everything and verify everything, and then come back with that revised version for the June 8th meeting. Hopefully we'll be, more, we'll be ready to go, and hopefully, Sharon, you can be comfortable with it, and other folks in the committee will be comfortable with it at that point. Does that sound okay? Okay. Anybody else? So I think now that we're at about 10 o'clock, unless Antonio, and I think Stephanie, did you have one other point, or were you?
Nope, I was
I have
good.
one more question as well.
Okay, so we'll go Antonio, and then we'll go to Mark.
I'll be
And I have a
real
question.
brief. I would real quick. Section 2, I think we already talked about this or addressed this, but section 2 is review and update city policies and codes. Number E, or letter E and letter F. I think they're saying 2 different things, so I appreciate that, Evan, that was put in there. I would like some clarification perhaps on the wording for the final report, where I think we're dodging the word variance. I think developers could seek a variance, but if we're trying to say that the point of a variance potentially could be in lieu of more number of units that are considered workforce or affordable, not market rate, then I think we need to be a little more crisp on the language. I think it's a little bit open to interpretation there, in my opinion.
We have to stay away from, the term variance, because that is a legal term for zoning. I'd like to stay away from that if we possibly could. It just gets really touchy because a variance is actually a legal act by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay, and I totally understand that. I guess what I'm asking for is that we review that language so that such that if we are recommending that, we, again, just going back to the number of units that are being built, I don't think I think it's very vague, actually, the way it's worded right now. The recommendation that we're making is not structured, I don't think, but I'd like to relook at that if that's possible.
And again,
Okay.
our whole objective is to add more housing. Why does it always have to be subsidized? I mean, if workforce housing is not subsidized, none of my units are subsidized, and they are all workforce housing. So if we want more housing, let's increase height density. I mean, it's just plain and simple. You increase the height, maybe you can get more housing. Gets more expensive.
I think a quick example is that new project that's being potentially proposed down here by the lakefront. None of that is, I don't believe that they're asking for any sort of additional stories and or variances, any special treatment as such, maybe in the form of subsidies, to Mark's point. But I think the bottom line is that they may not be adding any market rate, any under market rate of workforce units to this project at all. So I think if we don't have a way of having developers really look at what the options are for building affordable units, then I'm not sure that we're addressing the point, even if it doesn't use the word variance.
Except that I don't think we should penalize someone for doing a development where they're going to make money. And I think what a lot of times those units open up is they open up other homes in the city of Marquette for people to domino and move up. And I think people would be very surprised if they knew, all the people that demonize condos, I think they'd be very surprised to know how many Marquette citizens moved from their home to a condo and opened up that home for someone else to move up into, which opened up their starter home. And that does fill in.
I get your point, but I think as a committee, I think we have a responsibility to look at this as it's not all or nothing. I think that's part of the mentality, I think, is that there can be projects that are built that have a blend of a scale of, 10 units are this, 100 units are this. I think we're looking at it, we have to kind of change that picture a little bit too, in my opinion.
And I think, Antonio, that's kind of what these recommendations are trying to get at. It's not trying to, penalize people who want to build market rate housing, but it's trying to create incentives for people who might otherwise build only market rate housing to say, hey, maybe some of those units on the top floor will be a little bit more expensive, but we're going to be able to go up an extra story or something and have more affordable units. So, and I think that, the discussion of, well, we're just trying to get more housing, or, there's, as Stephanie, there's the domino effect theory that's, definitely been something that's been discussed and studied a lot in housing policy, by housing policy experts. I definitely think the jury is still out on that. I don't claim to be an expert at all, but just I think that certainly happens, that you have that domino effect, the musical chairs of people moving up and then units get vacated. But I think it often fails to consider the gentrification effect of building more very high-end housing. And I think that that's sort of a separate issue from what we're talking about here, which is just trying to create those incentives to maybe have some more mixed income developments. Also, I would point out that and maybe I should have started the meeting with this, but, we were tasked by the city commission to study and come back with recommendations regarding housing affordability. That's our purpose as the committee, housing affordability, as designated by the commission. I just think it's important to underline that. So maybe just generally creating more housing, can help with that, but that's not our purpose, right? It's our purpose is to try and figure out how housing could become more affordable in Marquette.
So Antonio, what would you like adjusted in E and F?
So I think we need to be, I mean, I get we can't use the word variance, right? That makes a lot of sense to me. To me, it opens up offering some sort of, special bonus deal to the developer without actually being more concrete about what we're asking in return. So I don't know if there's, I think F said certain zones. Well, what certain zones are we talking about? I think that it needs to be a little more clear as to what we're asking for if we're going to make the jump of saying we're willing to offer, or we are in agreement that density bonus would be good if something happened in return. So I just don't know what those things that in return are. So again, back to the development that is down here proposed by the lakefront, I think there can be a blend of units that are mixed income. I don't think it's all or nothing. I don't think that they all have to be ultra high-end luxury or they all have to be affordable. I think that there can be an entry point where a developer could start at some point saying, yes, we do recognize the need, and we can do, something, whether it's another story on top of that with a certain number of units. But I think we're not designating, we're not being concrete in what we're designating. I guess that's kind of my point.
Okay. Yeah, and again, that might be one that we have to go back and work on a little bit more. And Antonio, we can touch base after the meeting and get a little bit more clarity on what you're looking for there.
Sure.
I think that one thing that might help potentially is specifically mentioning, the phrase of, mixed income housing, or something along those lines, in one or both of these, if that's sort of the objective here. Is to maybe have market rate developments that also have like workforce housing units in them.
I think you want to, if I can say, I'd like to leave a little bit of that to the Planning Commission. I mean, they're the ones that operate in that space, and as long as you can come up with something, even if it's a little ambiguous, they're going to understand the intent of it. I mean, we want zoning incentives for developments that maximize number of units and projects. And from there, the Planning Commission has a list of tools they can look at. It could be, okay, well, here's a trade-off. In this district, we can allow height in turn for X number of units or a certain percentage or things like that. But that's really the world they operate in. And I think you guys would be a little bit frustrated, trying to come up with something. And it also, when that's handed to the Planning Commission, it might be something they totally disagree with or have a different opinion on. And I would really recommend just leaving it in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Dennis. I think I can agree to that. If that's the intent of the language, is not to pigeonhole ourselves in something that we can't be more creative in the tools that they may have in their arsenal to be able to modify some of the zoning or agree to some of the zoning that's being proposed, whether it's mixed income, et cetera. So I definitely agree with you there. Yes.
So, and I think that, thanks. Antonio, we can wordsmith some of this stuff too, to make sure that, as Dennis said, that we're giving that flexibility to the Planning Commission, but at the same time, we're making our intent very clear.
Yes.
We don't need to be prescriptive, but we need to, make it clear what the objective is here. So I think that's a good point. Mark, you had a couple comments, I think.
Not on this, but further down, item 3G, which would be support the creation of a community land trust if possible. I guess I need more explanation on what that might be.
Sure. So at our little bit of background, so I had sent some information to the committee about the community land trust model ahead of our meeting in May. And then at the meeting in May, if you'll recall, Sarah Lucas mentioned several different, we talked about this earlier on in the report too,
Yep.
about Sarah Lucas's presentation, and she presented several different ways in which long-term affordability can be kind of baked into housing development. And there's several options, but one of them that she mentioned was the community land trust model. And a community land trust, basically, I mean, it mentions it above. Let me just look it up here, the document. But essentially what a community land trust is it's like a nonprofit organization that when they acquire land specifically for affordable or like mixed income housing development, usually they'll get land from donations or fundraising to purchase some property, and then they retain ownership of the land if there are any owner occupied units that are developed on community land trust land. And what happens is that they sell the home to the homeowner at an affordable price, and then they continue to own the land, but they'll lease the land that house is on through like a long-term, like 99-year lease for $1 or something to the homeowner. And then when the house is sold, the community land trust has the ability to, through a formula or whatever, to determine, how much that house can be resold for. So this is like a way that, this is a way to address that question I think we've discussed in the committee of like, well, let's say we build some affordable single family homes. That sounds great until 2 or 3 years later, they've all been resold by, sort of opportunistic people who bought them and then sold them for 30-40% more than they bought them for, because that's what the market will bear. So this is one potential means to address
Which
that
just
long-term
to highlight, that's how Ishpeming was developed to a
Right.
big extent. When I started in real estate, we sold a lot of houses that were on CCI leased land.
Yeah, exactly. And this is this is kind of along the same lines, except the company owning it is basically a community. It could be Marquette Community Foundation, set up the similar way.
Right. And this isn't necessarily what we're recommending. I mean, I think in the report, we're pretty clear we're talking about a nonprofit, but there are also community land trusts that are semi-public in other parts of the country and in other countries. But there's different ways it can work. But I think what we're talking about here is to just support, to facilitate, right? We're not talking about the city of Marquette going out and forming its own CLT. I think we'd be talking maybe working in tandem with, the county land bank and maybe the community foundation, as Dennis said, LSCP, with Sarah Lucas in her leadership position there, right? Maybe it's possible in the coming years for a community land trust to be developed in the Marquette area, and that could be very helpful in terms of housing affordability.
How's that word? Everybody like that word?
Yeah.
Sure. That sounds good to me, Dennis. Mark, did you have another point that you wanted to bring up, or does that address kind of your question?
I'm good. I'm good. I just wanted to know a little bit more about it.
Sure. And you didn't have anything else you wanted to ask? Sorry, I thought maybe you had something else.
I'm good for now.
Okay. And I also want to note, Mark, you did send that email to the committee, I believe, or maybe it was just.
I think I just sent it to you today. I sent it to Dennis earlier, but some of the stuff's in here.
Okay, great. And would you mind? I mean, I think that. So thank you for sending me that email. We can incorporate, make sure that those, various recommendations that are being incorporated. Would you mind if I forwarded that to the committee? Or
no problem.
Okay, just so everybody has access to it, and so we'll make sure we're kind of going through that and considering that as we're putting the finishing touches on here. But just so everybody else knows, I mean, I think, Mark, you've mentioned literally everything in here in that email at some point in one of our past meetings, but just about kind of streamlining that permitting process, the permitting processes, and thinking about ways the city can make it a little bit easier, for people to cross the T's and dot the I's. So when it comes to housing and development. So, and I think that's kind of sort of generally covered in the report as it is, but maybe we could be a little bit more specific. So appreciate
Also,
that.
Just to mention for this committee, housing prices are going to continue to skyrocket. Think about OSB last year was $7 a sheet. It is now $52 a sheet up at Lowe's. Just to keep that in perspective.
Low inflation.
Okay, that's hyperinflation.
Right, which is a good point. That, you know, and I think that this is, you know, where we get to this question of, as a committee and as the city, you know, we need to make sure that the city is playing its proper role as a public entity. But at the same time, you know, as you noted, Mark, right, like we've got some really serious problems with the price of materials, with the housing market in general. I mean, this is a the problem that we're facing right now is a problem that's the result largely of, you know, market forces kind of running amok. And so how do we, you know, kind of, how do we work as a public entity, as the city of Marquette, in tandem with the market to try and correct some of those issues? You know, I think that's and overcome some of those challenges. At the end of the day, you know, like, this problem it can't be solved by the city alone or by the market alone. There needs to be, you know, there needs to be some sort of meeting in the middle there, which I think this report does a pretty good job of striking that balance.
Yeah,
so
Antonio can take a look at this highlighted phrase real quick and see if that I kind of combined E and F.
Do you mind if I read it out loud real quick?
Go ahead.
E, create zoning incentives for developments that maximize the number of units in projects and or guarantee a certain percentage of affordable units. An example is allowing conditional increases in height limits in certain zoning districts to permit the creation of more affordable housing units in dense, walkable contexts to permit more housing creation. I definitely think I like where that's going a lot more, Dennis. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not a wordsmithing expert, so I think, yeah, let's go offline and see if there's something else that we can think of. But I do think that's a little bit more in the path that I was thinking as well. If anybody has any other comments, for sure.
Thanks.
And I do have one other question, Evan, when we get back to a few more comments, concerns, questions section.
Sure. Yeah, Antonio, if you got one thing I just want to note is that we are coming up on time. I know we had wanted to talk about the North Marquette Opportunity Zone. I think Dennis has got a good start going there. We're not going to have a whole lot talking about it, but it is really important to mention it and explain what that Opportunity Zone is, and what opportunities might be coming from it in terms of housing affordability. And then finally, that redevelopment ready community certification, other state partnerships. I mean, Dennis and our planning staff are all on top of that. I just and can certainly hash that one out too.
We're one document away from getting our certification.
Right. I just wanted to note what some of the benefits of that are, and also some other things like with the Michigan Strategic Fund and some other things, right? Other potential state partnerships there. Just wanted to have one, paragraph noting some of those things, but we can do that offline. I don't think that anybody will have problems with it. But Antonio, please go ahead and ask your question. We can kind of take the last 10 minutes just to continue this sort of round robin thing.
Thank you, Dennis, as well. What I started to think about, and I don't know how, I need to be able to elaborate this point a little bit more firmly here, so bear with me. As we were talking about point 3, or column 3 or section 3 under seeking partnerships. I know that in some of the presentations that I was a part of or heard throughout the affordability aspect, this is not just I understand the committee is Marquette City, only basically we're looking at anything within our purview here to recommend to the planning commission, et cetera, and even the city commission. But as we were thinking about the concepts of community land trust or some sort of strategic method of involving other entities, whether such be government, community-based nonprofits, for-profits, private, public, I'm almost curious, and this is not necessarily something that I have an issue with the report on, but how do we elaborate that we'd like to continue to seek longstanding conversations with Marquette Township, with Ishpeming, with Nagani, with other townships that may have land that they say, you know what, that land's been sitting empty for 20 years. Why don't we have and work with someone then to find or facilitate extra units that could be built that don't have to be on the lakefront, right? We talked about that a little bit. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, where can we include in the report, if ever, under column 3J or so, how do we work with other government entities or make that recommendation that we have conversations with them? I think it would be silly to just stay here in Marquette City.
You mean like regional
I think
planning for housing?
I
Yes.
think he already addresses
Yeah.
that under 3G.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just going to say, Antonio, completely agree. This is definitely a good discussion we've had as a committee. If you look under item 5, section 5, implementation, you go all the way down to the bottom, recommendation G, encourage a regional level public dialogue about housing affordability and other housing related issues in the greater North Central UP area, including municipal and county governments and other public and private stakeholders. Does that meet what, I guess first, like, does that meet what you were thinking of? And second, do you think that would be better to have up in section 3, or do you think it's fine where it is?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I did read that, but I guess I was trying to be a little more specific with that. So yes, that would fall under 3 as well if you wanted to include it in there. Otherwise, I'm good with that.
Why don't we put encourage the creation of, as opposed to encourage a regional level dialogue?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because I think
Sure.
if we just talk about dialogue, then, as we know, the governments can sit around forever. But if we encourage the creation of a regional planning for housing, it won't force them to do it, but it certainly will get everybody on the same page. And we'll look, as Antonio was saying, where the city blends into the townships and the townships blend into another city or whatever, we'll have a better view, I think, of where we need to be and how we need to know, not only just for housing, but obviously transportation and everything else.
Yes. Thank you.
So how about this? How about we could say encourage a regional level public planning effort, or initiative regarding housing affordability or planning exercise.
How about just encourage regional level public planning about housing affordability? No effort, no.
That's good.
And take out the at the beginning. Encourage
Yes.
regional level public planning for housing affordability and other housing related issues. Yeah.
I think
Thank
it
you.
looks good. Antonio, did you have another point?
No, thank you. Just I agree with everything that everyone just said here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Evan, my only
Right.
question really was more regarding the clarification, at least in my mind, of the relationship with the BLP and the city. I know there's some sort of oversight, like on rate schedules, whatever, but I'm just thinking, if they own all this land and we're kind of saying in here that we need to work with them to develop that, is that something that we have control over, or we can kind of push the envelope, or is this something that's kind of weird, like hospital county things that are
Yeah,
different
from
counties have different things?
Dan, from my experience, at my level, no, there's not much that can be done. And I
Okay.
know the city commission might be able to get creative, but if typically when you try to push something on the BLP, it doesn't get, it's just a bad press issue. Really, it's kind of in their wheelhouse. And,
Yep.
I think this is one of those things where the incoming city manager is going to, need to sit down and talk with the executive director and kind of co-plan, what do you have in mind for this vacant land that you have up here? What's the disposition of it? And hey, you could help us out a little bit, by the way, by, working with a developer or something.
Because I was thinking that, you know, whether we call it a community land trust or whether it's deed restrictions or whatever, when Mark brought that question up, and I was thinking about this already, that might be a classic to do some of these cottage little areas or some of the things we've talked about in the reports. And obviously most of you already thought about stuff like that, but that would be a classic land trust type process where we really control, or they can control what goes on there, who
Yep.
owns it, and kind of goes backwards on it. That's all I got.
That's a good point, Dennis. And, you know, I mean, certainly I think that there's going to need to be further discussions between the city and the BLP. But, you know, I think that's all we're saying in the report is that there's potential
Okay.
there. There's potential there, and that the city should be working with the BLP.
And a little push that the BLP should be working with the city.
Yep. I think that's in there for sure. I think we mentioned probably 3 or 4 times the BLP as a potential partner, and to be honest, I mean, I think that if I remember correctly, I think I received an email from somebody at the BLP. It may have been the executive director, but you know, they weren't able to make it to our work session. But they kind of said, hey, like we're aware of the housing issue. We read the initial report. You know, think it's interesting. You know, looking, you know, we're willing to engage with the city or whatever, you know. So I think that they understand that this is a conversation that needs to happen at some point. So.
Evan, there's one other thing that I have heard consistently that I don't know if we can somehow put it in here somewhere, is rent increases seem to be, and Mark, I understand the need for it, but people have asked if there could be a maximum rent in the city of Marquette, control rent increases, you know, not allow a 30% increase, which that's obviously beyond the purview of the city. But I'm wondering if possibly there could be some incentivizing through the city to developers to maintain a 20-year maximum increase on rent for a pilot or something on that order. And I think there's several different areas that potentially that could be added in there just to encourage a rent control.
I understand where you're coming from, but I will also tell you that landlords' costs are going up
Through the roof.
exponentially as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm a landlord, so,
Mhm.
but that's the feedback that I've been getting. So I think maybe just addressing it, that the city would like to work with landlords to
Yes,
do something with rent control.
I totally agree,
I
Sharon. I think
object fully.
that's another angle that I've heard is just
I
to
have a
discourage price
really-
gouging.
You will destroy your housing if you even mention rent control. You will have
We're-
0 developers in.
I don't believe Sharon is talking about rent control though in its true form, Mark. I think
Oh.
Use the word rent
I'd like to be
control.
careful about that term. That's a very specific term.
But what I'm thinking more is with a developer to, if like the through the opportunity zone and through the trust fund to encourage a developer to maintain a fair market increase in rent consistent with, I mean, you could get, you know, qualify it to death, but maybe just address that the city will consider it or is aware of it or something.
Yeah, and Sharon, I think for new development, you know, that would be, and that's definitely an interesting thing to look at. I mean, I think that first of all, like when I want to be conscious of time here, but I mean, I have also, believe me, I have received emails from constituents, multiple, you know, people in the last even just the last couple of weeks, saying, you know, sharing their stories about their rent going up. And I mean, it's a real concern. I think that what we're trying to address in the report is like, yes, we need to create more low-income housing. We need to create more missing middle housing so that there's more options for people. But at the same time, like that is an issue that needs to be addressed, is what about people that already have affordable housing, but they might not have it for too much longer if, you know, their rent goes up. And so definitely a discussion
But I also,
for us to have.
I also think we have to understand this is a national issue, and it is not just like Marquette is the only place that has this issue. The issue is coming up with trying to find people to mow the lawns, to fix the things that are broken, to replace. I mean, it's just getting very expensive. And I don't think people that are landlords, we got the great letter. There's nothing saying people have to raise their rents, but they're raising their rents because that's what the market is allowing. It's not like there's rentals sitting empty because they're too expensive. I have a really hard time when we start to push things that are completely infringing on private property owner rights.
Yeah, and I think this is a larger discussion than we can have in the next like 2 minutes. We should be continuing this meeting for sure. And even if it's not addressed directly in the final report, I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to continue. The reality is that I think that, we could certainly include, like exactly what Sharon, what you're saying of a commitment from a rental housing developer who is, say, benefiting from brownfield TIF or city, purchasing city land. You could have a development agreement clause that says, hey, for the next so many years, you should, adhere. We're going to ask that you adhere to, fair market rent increases or something along those lines. Now, that can be a point of negotiation and discussion between the city and a developer. So, I think, that's a topic for further discussion. And, maybe we can try and come up with some language for the draft final report for June 8th. And if people aren't comfortable with it, we will have the ability to edit or just remove that language at the June 8th meeting, because we'll be able to do the same thing of editing in real time. My hope is that we'll be able to keep those edits to sort of a minimum so that everybody feels comfortable voting at the end of that meeting on the 8th. But I think that's something that we can do, is put together some language trying to address Sharon's point without, as Antonio and Stephanie have noted, like recommending, rent control or whatever, which, yeah, certainly that's a
So if
whole
you're
other
really
animal.
recommending rent control, why would a developer come in here?
We're not recommending rent control, Mark.
Right. No,
That's
we're
not
not.
what we want to
You
do.
make your problem a lot worse.
Well,
No, I think there's a dramatic distinction between a rent control ordinance and a clause in a development agreement with a specific developer on a specific property that's maybe benefiting, again, from city land or brownfield TIF provided by the Marquette Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. That's apples to oranges comparison in my view. I do have to agree with Antonio on that.
and in my land, in the subsidized housing land, that would be okay with developers. They're used to that. My point is just to put something in the report that somehow addresses that the city of Marquette is aware this is an issue and would like to do something to incentivize that to not happen further in new developments.
Okay.
Great. And on that note, I think we've got some people that have to head out. I don't know how much longer we're going to have a quorum. This is a really good discussion, and we're going to continue this discussion at our meeting at 10:30 on June 8th. So thank you, everybody, for being here and taking time and putting a lot of thought into this. I think this is extremely productive, and we're going to be able to have a final draft for you all on the 8th that everybody can be happy with and hopefully support. So in any case, I hope everybody has a good rest of your week and a good weekend, and
Hey,
we'll
Evan.
see you.
Wait,
Yeah.
There was written public comment, so I don't know what the rules
Right.
are, but do you want to read that now or save that for the next meeting since we're out of time?
Oh,
Dr. Goodrich had sent an email to Cody, Commissioner Mayer.
Oh, yeah. I think I just forwarded that to the committee. Antonio, do you remember, did he intend to have it read aloud at the meeting?
I don't know, but I do want to make sure we're being fair if that was the intent. So I guess you could clarify that with Cody, please.
Yeah, I'll clarify that with Cody, and I may read that email aloud at the beginning of our meeting on June 8th, just in the interest of time, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Dennis, you had something?
Nope, I'm good.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And hope everybody has, again, a nice week, and we'll see you on